Mount Washington Auto Road welcomes you to the heart of the White Mountains and your adventure on the Northeast's highest peak. You are about to embark on a journey that will do more than just take you to the highest summit in the Northeast. You are going to the birthplace of legends, following up a path that leads through time and winds its way through woods, wind, and weather. At the state park on top, you'll see the home of the Mount Washington Observatory and the historic Summit Stage Office, which is where the world's highest winds were recorded in 1934. More about that later. This audio tour will be your information and entertainment guide as you travel on the oldest man-made attraction in the United States. Your driving time to the top will be approximately 25 minutes, and this tour will help you understand a lot more about the remarkable views and amazing things that have happened here since the road opened to the public in 1861. Now, before we get into all the storytelling on how this remarkable road came to be and some of the funny things folks have done on it, we have some pretty important information to pass along. Among other wonders, you will be entering the fragile alpine zone, home to many rare and unique forms of plants and flowers. There will be many opportunities to stop your car and walk around, so please take care to leave these special environments as you found them. It is only because others have been thoughtful in past generations that these small, endangered treasures are still here for us to enjoy. So if you watch your step, future generations might have the same opportunity. It is only through our continued stewardship that we can protect and preserve the resources that we all treasure. Now just imagine that this road opened to the public in 1861, and the scenes which are about to unfold before you have remained unchanged since then. Also unchanged is the need for safe driving. Now the road's remarkable safety record over the past century and a half is because drivers, whether in horse-drawn vehicles of the old days or the motor vehicles of this century, respect the basic rules of safety, which apply to the trip up and down Mount Washington. As you ascend the mountain and then descend after your visit to the summit, these driving tips will help maximize safety and minimize inconvenience. Please keep the following in mind as your journey continues. The auto road has two-way traffic coming and going at all times. Keep to your side of the road. Don't worry, it's wide enough for two cars to pass anywhere on the road. We urge you to drive up in low gear. This means less work for your engine and allows it to run cool. You should stay in low gear for your entire trip up and down the road. If ever there was a road that was designed for low gear, this is it.
Know what to do.
Mark Twain once said, "If you don't like the weather in New England, just wait a minute." He must have been thinking of Mount Washington because things can change quickly and dramatically around here. Depending on conditions, you should maintain a speed of approximately 15 to 20 miles an hour. Now, your actual speed will depend on traffic and prevailing weather conditions. If it seems like you're holding up cars behind you, please be considerate of others and allow them to pass. Avoid using your air conditioner, as this may cause the engine to overwork. There will be plenty of cool air to refresh you as you continue to gain elevation. If the vehicle does begin to run hot, turn on the heater. It may sound strange, but it will actually help cool the engine. Should you find yourself driving in a fog at any time while on the mountain, turn on your headlights for the sake of all oncoming traffic. And please remember, it's a New Hampshire state law that all persons under 18 years of age must wear a seatbelt. If either on the way up or down, for any reason you need assistance, flag down one of the white and green vans or road crew pickup trucks. Our drivers will be happy to help you in any way. Also, remember that cars coming down should yield the right of way to cars going up. Now, let's get to the storytelling about the place you've come to. The creation of our road to the sky all began back in 1853 when the New Hampshire legislature granted a charter to General David Maycomber to build the 8-mile road to the summit. It was a challenging task he set for himself, to say the least, but he had a vision. See, the White Mountains were beginning to gain a reputation as a destination resort, with grand hotels catering to wealthy travelers for the summer season. His path to the top of New England would surely be the high point of any visit to the North Country. Your presence here today confirms just how right he was. Anyway, one of the first of these grand hotels was the Glen House, which was located at the base area from which you began your climb. This hotel and 3 others burned to the ground over the years, around the turn of the century and after, though the base area is still referred to as the Glen, as it always has been. Seasons may change, but they always return, and the day will again surely come when travelers will find lodging in this most historic and remarkable of places. As you drive on through the hardwood forest, try to imagine what the early road builders faced. Dense trees and underbrush, sloping ridges and immense boulders and ledges were at every turn. Not a particularly inviting place to excavate a road, but this is Mount Washington, and no adversity would be too great if it resulted in the conquest of this famed peak. One young woman who visited the Glen House in 1854 explored the work in progress and wrote an article for Harper's Weekly magazine. In it, she recounted her memories of the road as a work in progress.
We have all been walking in the lowering twilight on the road which is making its way up Mount Washington. Though nothing is impossible to modern science, it would seem impossible to vanquish the obstacles to the enterprise, the inevitable steepness of the ascent, the rocky precipices. We passed on through the debris of blasted rocks, stumps of uprooted trees, and heaps of stones, till we got far enough into the mountain to feel its stern solitude. Mary Langdon.
And when that was written in 1854, they were still 7 years from completion. Fortunately for General Maycomber, his financial backing ran out halfway up the mountain, so it ended up taking 2 companies. Years of backbreaking labor, blasting, logging, clearing, and grading to complete the task. During a 2-year delay after the first company had failed, it was questionable as to whether or not the project would ever be completed. But the lure of Mount Washington was too great to keep this road from reaching the top. It was particularly difficult to make any progress with natural obstacles such as the weather combined with the primitive technology of the era to slow things down. Since dynamite had not been invented yet, all the blasting was done with black powder, a dangerous and at times unstable explosive. In order to split the massive rock ledges which blocked the planned way, individual holes were hand-drilled into solid rock and then filled with black powder, blown up and split apart one at a time. All the logging was done with axes, saws, and elbow grease. Teams of oxen and workhorses drew carts filled with gravel. All in all, it was a dirty, dangerous job, largely accomplished by immigrant labor working in a place not yet fit for man nor beast.
Is that ours?
Finally,
No, that's the cars
on
coming
August
down.
8th, 1861, it was done and done right. Many decades later, in a study completed with aerial surveys and the latest technology, the Army Corps of Engineers could find no improvement to the route as laid out in the middle of the last century. Today, this toll road is still privately owned and operated by the Mount Washington Summit Road Company, and with very little change of ownership, has remained a family business. As you continue upward, glimpses of mountain vistas begin to reveal themselves, but it wasn't always this way. In fact, around the turn of the century, logging barons had virtually clear-cut much of what is now the White Mountain National Forest. The decimation of these native forests created not only fire and erosion dangers, but created such an unsightly mess that the cause of conservation was taken up by the average citizen and politicians alike. As a result, the Weeks Act of 1911 established the White Mountain National Forest, among many others. These mountains remain protected today as a pristine reminder of the natural beauty of the wilderness. It is ironic, though, that it took the near destruction of everything that you see around you to motivate the effort to save it. Thankfully, what you see today is remarkably similar to what the first adventure seekers found in 1861. It was called the carriage road in those days, and there were as many as 25 mountain wagons and 120 horses in service each day of the season. These mountain wagons were specially designed and constructed for the carriage road by the Abbott Downing Company in Concord, New Hampshire. This company manufactured the famous Concord stagecoaches, which, aside from being shipped worldwide for use in commerce and transportation, were used in practically every Western movie ever made. The carriage road mountain wagons were pulled by 6 horses and seated as many as 12 passengers. A typical trip took 4 hours to get up, and though no one was in a rush in those days, passengers were at times asked to assist with one task. On windy days, those making the journey were asked to get out and collect rocks to add weight to the wagon so that it wouldn't tip over in the strong winds above treeline. Now, the ride down was another adventure in itself, taking a good 2 hours. The wheels on every trip down wore through a set of leather brakes as the horse, driver, and wagon fought gravity the whole way. Also, the carriage road stages weren't alone on the road by any means. Individual hotels had their own coaches for their guests, while other folks drove the family buckboard or surrey or rode on horseback. Then, as now, it was an active road that required the driver's full attention. As the word continued to spread, more and more people found their way to New Hampshire's North Country. New railroads continued to push their way past the lakes and into the hills, and while still a rural setting, the world had finally beaten its path to Mount Washington's door. Now, long before traveling tourists found Mount Washington, way back in the early 1600s, it was thought to be a place laden with riches. The quartz and the mica, which you will see glinting amidst the gray rock above treeline, was mistakenly considered to be diamonds and precious metals. Now, no doubt the disappointed early settler came to that realization after his long climb revealed only long views and no treasure. As you continue upward, you will begin to notice startling changes to the vegetation. Nearer to the bottom is a typical northeastern hardwood forest composed of maple, oak, birch, and beech trees. Further on, you'll see fewer hardwoods and more evergreens like balsam fir and spruce. And more significantly, these trees are diminishing greatly in size as the combination of wind, cold, and scarcity of proper soil create a difficult growing environment. Continuing upward, you are entering Krumholtz, or crooked wood zone. In some cases, these stunted and beautifully twisted and gnarled trees with a height of no more than just 2 or 3 feet are more than 100 years old.
Over the edge.
These unique trees have adapted to survive in this often inhospitable location as a wide variety of wildlife that calls this mountain range home. Moose, black bear, and deer are among the larger species, while bobcat, beaver, porcupine, raccoons, foxes, and countless types of birds can be found on Mount Washington slopes. Even on the summit, mice, moles, shrews, and voles have all adapted to survive in this extreme environment. As your journey takes you further up the mountainside, notice it has begun to get a bit cooler and that the trees continue to get smaller. As the road goes on to its height of more than a mile in the sky, 6,288 feet to be exact, the climate changes with it, eventually reaching the equivalent temperature one may find 600 miles north of here in the Arctic tundra region. This is further exemplified by the truly stunning array of alpine flowers, lichens, and mosses, some of which can be seen preserved at the Observatory Museum at the summit. Just think of it, in the distance of just a few miles upward, you've now traveled from the more familiar hardwood forest of our region through the Krumholtz to an area more like that of Alaska and Greenland. In total, there are dozens of rare species of plants found in the alpine zone of the Presidential Range. Plants like
Be an
the dwarf
interesting descent.
cinquefoil live only in the White Mountains and nowhere else in the planet, and are listed as federally protected species. Many of these unusual plants, though small, are very old, and some varieties don't even flower until they're 20 or more years old. Overall, many experts believe this mountain's landscape that you're viewing to be more than 10,000 years in the making. So again, we ask, when leaving your vehicle to explore the mountainside, you're aware that the endless vistas are only one of the most obvious wonders. There is an amazing world just under your feet, which, if not cared for, could be lost forever.
That's kind of scary on that
Pick
side,
up
isn't
or
it?
step on
Yeah,
a flower.
I'm not looking forward to
When you're
going that
out of your
way.
vehicle above tree line, please step only on the
I
rocks.
wish I could look.
This way, our fragile ecosystem
I wish
I
could
is
look.
something to marvel at for
It's a really
centuries to
long
come.
way down.
Scientific interest in Mount Washington has been ongoing for more than 200
It is kind of
years.
fun though,
In the
right?
last century,
This is
just the
really
novelty
pretty
of being
steep.
here was enough to inspire whole books. One
my
famous
gosh.
writer in the mid-1800s, T. Starr King, had this to say about the mountain's various
Go
climates.
over this
I
side.
send you a greeting this morning from the cupola of New Hampshire. If perchance you are suffering from the heat when this missive reaches you, let your eyes cool themselves by reading that just outside the tip-top house, the mercury is at 34 degrees. The ride from the glen was very easy. We rose indeed by climate as well as ridges. It was
Oh my
July
gosh, that's
at the base,
terrifying.
late September on the ledge, and November at the apex. Reverend Thomas
I think we're paying to do this.
King.
Now, the tip-top house he refers to was built in 1853. You're going to see
I
it
want our
in
money
just
back.
a bit. It is the only original summit building that survived the Great Fire of 1908. The summit, as you'll see it today, has evolved greatly from how it all began so long ago. It's always been a hub of activity for travelers.
2.5 miles yet.
The summit community in the 1890s was a very busy place. It featured a large hotel, stage office, railroad station, and even had its own newspaper. Among the Clouds was the first and only newspaper ever to be published on a mountaintop. All visitors to the peak had their names published in its pages, along with the local news and gossip. In fact, the latest daily editions used to make their way down after hours on the cog railway track on a contraption known as a slide board, or more popularly known as
Now the oil
devil's
temperature's
shingle.
going up.
Real
Yes.
history was
Yeah,
made
it's just
again
hanging around.
in 1899 when a little-known inventor named Freeland O. Stanley drove his locomobile up the road. He did it for publicity, hoping to build a name for his fledgling company. Stanley began his expedition from Newton, Massachusetts, with a goal of finishing on the top of Mount Washington. Now, the automotive age was dawning, and on August 31st, 1899, an unlikely little vehicle looking like a horse-drawn buggy without the horse became the first motor car to climb the mountain. As noted in Flora Stanley's account of the adventure,
Now, I'm
the
gonna be
journey
on the
received
scary
more
side.
laughter than laurels, as motor vehicles were still a virtually unknown sight to the general public. The amazed responses of the folks in each village they passed through, combined with the success of the Mount Washington ascent, proved the value of this well-seen publicity stunt. But few realized that Stanley's vehicle was the first
No.
of many that would follow,
Look on the other
and
side.
that a new
mean up
age
here?
had begun.
Yeah.
No.
Even F.E. Stanley himself, Heppo
so you won't hit
Stanley's
cars
twin
coming up
brother
the
and
road.
partner, wasn't sure of what the new invention would be capable of,
Louise.
as expressed in an 1897 letter to his wife after one of their horseless carriages nearly caused an accident in town.
I wrote you some time ago about motor carriages. Well, I am building one. I'm making all the plans, and it will weigh 350 pounds, and it will be 4 inches wider and 5 inches longer than our best buggy was. It will cost me about $500. It will not be afraid of a steamroller, and will have no bad habits. It will stand without hitching.
Breathe in here. Let's see
And
what the...
perhaps that is all it will do.
Well, as history had shown us,
We're only
it
at
did do more than
4%.
stand still, as did the Stanley brothers, who went on to create the
5,000
still
feet.
famous Stanley steamer. You will soon be approaching the summit. If it is a clear day, you are seeing
Pull over,
some
let
of
these
the
people over.
most magnificent views
Dad,
to be
you're
found
going to
anywhere
fall.
in the United States. If
Stop.
it is not a clear day, then you are truly learning what it means to be among the clouds. Now, you've already passed the Horn, Oh My God Curve, the Cragway, Cow Pasture, Mother-in-Law's Drop, and Home Stretch. In any case, the summit community welcomes you. Take the time to visit the historic Tip Top House, which holds the record as the oldest summit building standing since
It kind of
1853.
is, isn't it?
The Sherman Adams State Park building will offer you a top of the world perspective from the observation deck. Hot meals and restrooms are inside. While there, wander through the Mount Washington Observatory Museum and gift shop downstairs for a look at some rare
I don't think I'd want to ride a
mementos of the past.
motorcycle up this.
And if you only see
Seems a
one
little bit
thing, be sure to stop at the historic Summit Stage Office, which is where the observers huddle while measuring the world's highest recorded wind, 231 miles per hour in 1934. You won't have any trouble recognizing which building it is. It's the one that's chained to the ground. If your headlights are on, be sure to turn them off before exploring the summit. You should be coming to the summit pretty soon, so save the rest of this tour for when you begin the trip back down.
There's a spot.
that you've had the opportunity to experience the world above treeline firsthand, prepare yourself for a whole new series of scenic vistas on the way down. Before we continue our story, let us briefly emphasize these important driving tips. For the trip down, the two most important facts to remember are these. First, use low gear the whole way down. This will allow the transmission and engine to act as a brake and help maintain a slow speed. Remember, low gear is usually indicated by a 1 or an L or L1 on your shifter. Second, don't ride your brakes. A pumping action of the foot pedal allows the brakes to run cooler than does just a steady pressure. And never use water to cool your brakes. If they begin to fade, stop at the next pullout and allow them to cool while you enjoy the view. If you're in the fog, please turn on your headlights and remember cars heading down should yield the right of way to the cars on their way up. You may have seen hikers while you're on the summit. Some are day hikers, climbing the mountains or traversing the Presidential Range by any of the miles of trails that crisscross the slopes. Many begin from the Appalachian Mountain Club's headquarters just south of here in Pinkham Notch. Visible just above the AMC base camp is Tuckerman Ravine, famed for the challenging spring skiing. But skiing in this ravine is not for the faint of heart or casual skier. The head wall and gullies can be more extreme than anyone expects. Other merry wanderers may include the long haul hikers who are traversing the Appalachian Trail. This famous footpath stretches more than 2,100 miles from Georgia through to Maine and crosses the autoroad on its way. Even for these folks, reaching the top of New England is a milestone in their journey. The Native American populations of the area, the Abenaki tribe, among others, considered Ajiakachuk, as they referred to Mount Washington, a sacred place where the Great Spirit lived. So rumor has it that they never climbed the mountain. This entire region was home to great numbers of Native Americans prior to the arrival of European ships and people. But times had begun to change as sparsely populated coastal communities of colonists continued to move inland. One of these early settlers was named Darby Field. After seeing the shining summit from a ship off the coast of Maine, he set out in search of his fortune, enlisting 2 Native American guides to accompany him into the wilds of this unknown land. Darby set out in a birch bark canoe near Exeter, New Hampshire, paddled up the coastline into the Saco River and up to what is now Glen, New Hampshire. And after obtaining permission from the local tribe elders, Darby Field and his 2 companions set out on what would become the first ever ascent of this formidable mountain. Whether it was riches, glory, adventure, or a combination of all 3 he sought, Darby and his guides achieved their quest and their place in history more than 350 years ago. After the wake-up call, the mountain rolled over and went back to sleep for about another 150 years. And it was the Crawford family, Abel and then Ethan after him, who finally began housing and then guiding guests around Mount Washington in the 1790s. As the story goes, it is believed that the first visitors who arrived at Crawford's Inn with their express purpose of climbing Mount Washington did so in 1818. Ethan's later journal entry reflects the typical Yankee flair for understatement of this massive effort. He only wrote,
My father and I made a footpath from the notch out through the woods, and it was advertised in the newspapers, and we soon began to have a few visitors.
And nearly 2 centuries later, they've never stopped coming. If for nothing else, the Crawford family's legacy is assured by the fact that they cut the first hiking trail up the mountain in 1819, which is still in use today and is the oldest hiking trail in America. Beyond that, the Crawfords cut the first bridle path, which incidentally later became the principal route of the Cog Railroad.
Cold.
The world above treeline is your world now, and through your care, its rarity will be preserved for the next time that you come, or for all those who come after. Now that you've seen the Alpine Zone, you can understand why we are so dedicated to its conservation. To your left, you'll see the Great Gulf Wilderness. This is a glacial cirque of more than 5,500 acres that was officially designated a wilderness area in 1964. This wilderness designation is especially important in that it protects a vast area from any form of man's intrusions. There's no timber harvesting, mining, or buildings of any kind are allowed. With the exception of a few hiking trails, only the forces of nature are at work in the Great Gulf Wilderness. Though it is unmarked today, the halfway point used to be a stopover for guests and horses in the old days. The halfway house offered shelter and refreshments before the last long pull to the top. Now take a minute to think again of the horse teams straining against their harnesses as the drivers spoke commands and encouragement. Horses ruled this road for the first 50 years of its life. In fact, it wasn't until 1912 that the first gas-powered vehicles took over the job of carrying guests up the road. From that time on, the horse-drawn era began to fade from memory, and the carriage road eventually became the auto road. The first motor vehicle used to carry passengers, a Thomas Flyer, began the change in 1912, followed in 1917 by a fleet of Pierce Arrows, then Ford Woodies in the 1930s, Internationals in the 1950s and 60s, and finally the vans that you see cruising on the road today. In many ways, the evolution of transportation played itself out right on the path that you now travel. With an average grade of 12%, the auto road presents a manageable challenge for each new generation of transportation technology. In 1904, one of the first motorsports events in America took place right here when the Climb to the Clouds race was held on the very road you're now driving. Mount Washington was a test track of sorts because if a car could prove itself on these unforgiving slopes, it could work anywhere. Many traditional thinkers were not ready to acknowledge the worth of these mechanical contraptions. There was a statewide newspaper, the Manchester Union Leader, wrote,
"The whole thing is an unmitigated nuisance. The lives and property of perfectly helpless people have been menaced for no reason than to provide amusement for total strangers. Some drivers can be trusted, most cannot. If these people think of coming up another year, let them stay in jail a couple of days, and everyone will be the better for it."
Now, as you drive along in your vehicle today, try to imagine these two scenes in your mind. First, see the early cars with their 15 horsepower engines straining to make the grade, and then the other extreme, the high-powered race cars of today that climb to speeds of more than 100 miles an hour on the same turns that you are negotiating right now.
That's insanity.
Throughout history, the most daring of racers have always tried to capture the speed record on Mount Washington. Where horse-drawn wagons took 3 to 4 hours to make the ascent, early autos did it in just under 2 hours. The most recent racers have shaved the time to well under 7 minutes, so they don't take in much of the scenery. If it has been a clear and sunny day for you here today, consider yourself lucky. The weather on Mount Washington is generally more interesting than that, though. It's not that the weather can change quickly here, it's that the mountain seems to generate its own climate and environment. Sure, it basically tracks with the 4 seasons the rest of us know. It just overlaps them more and then mixes them together. So rain, snow, and sun make the rounds based more on random chance than on what the calendar says. Some days there's rain in the valleys and beautiful sun on the mountain, or vice versa. Some days clouds fly by close enough to touch them. Other times an undercast develops where a blanket of clouds shroud the lowland, and the summits of the taller mountains in the Presidential Range protrude like islands in a sea of white. hundreds of inches of snow each year, hurricane-force winds on more than a few occasions, fog thick enough to chew. This and more makes up what we call Mount Washington weather. It is both the diversity and extremes in the weather on this mountain that have made it a center of meteorological studies since the mid-1800s. The Hitchcock-Huntington expedition was the first to winter over on the summit in 1870. It was a remote, harsh winter wilderness which exposed these scientists to conditions they couldn't have imagined. The U.S. Signal Corps took over from 1870 until 1892 and experienced many of the same conditions that the current members of the Mount Washington Observatory staff contend with. This journal entry from the logbook details a difficult evening for the early observers.
Hold on, this guy go by here. He wants to go fast.
January 27, 1875. Coldest of the season, 46 below. The
Bird.
wind is blowing a hurricane and has done so all through the night past. Had work today to keep warm. The wind and cold penetrate every cranny. Enormous drifts of snow have formed about the building, and as fast as the passage is cut out and the windows cleared, the wind drives in snow to fill out the gaps. The coal is
Alright,
far
that's
from
enough
being
chips,
good.
C3.
It is full of rocks and clinkers. Respectfully suggests that good coal and another heating stove be purchased. If such weather as this is to continue, it would be wicked to keep men in such a dwelling. Sergeant Isaac Burr.
It can be assumed that good coal and another stove weren't purchased because winter occupation ceased in 1890. It took 40 years to round up another crew of dedicated weather watchers. In 1932, Alex McKenzie, Joe Dodge, Bob Monahan, and Sal Pagliuca staked a new claim on the summit, and the Mount Washington Observatory began round-the-clock weather observations that still continue to this very day. Then came the day that no one expected. A day that has gone down in history and has yet to be topped. It was April 12th, 1934, that the world's highest recorded winds, 231 miles an hour, blew over the summit of Mount Washington. Pagliuca's logbook entry for that day tells the story.
We've been taking turns knocking ice from the anemometer post. Shortly after 1 a.m., I set out to clear the ice again and disappeared into the fog on the roof. I felt the full blast of the 200-mile-per-hour southeast wind on my face. Kneeling on the platform, I pounded the foot-thick ice accumulation with all my strength, but alas, wasn't making much impression on the rough frost.
On that day, Mount Washington earned another place in history and was forever nicknamed the home of the world's worst weather. Because of this, various companies and scientific institutions have tested everything from jet engines to paint and winter clothing. It is because of the reliably harsh extremes of Mount Washington weather that so many different types of tests have been and continue to be done here. In a typical year, the temperature averages 27 degrees. The winds, although averaging 35 miles an hour, exceed hurricane force on more than 100 days out of the year.
Wow.
The summit is in the clouds more than 60% of the time. The snowfall averages 245 inches per year, though more than 500 inches, that's more than 47 feet, fell in the winters of 1968 and 69. Below treeline, the Great Glen Trails Outdoor Center uses the road as part of their cross-country trail system. This winter, you can take our specially designed snow coach on the road just above treeline for a breathtaking look at the Presidential Range in winter, and we'll do all the driving. It's a time of unimaginable beauty and deep snow. In fact, on part of the road known as the Cragway, 20 or more feet of snow accumulate each winter. Before the days of heavy equipment, pure manpower opened up drifted parts of the road. As the tourist season approached, the road crew armed with only shovels would begin to move mountains of snow that have accumulated in certain areas. Now imagine facing a wall of snow 20 feet deep and 300 feet long, knowing it was your job to break through. This is what the early road crews faced year after year. Today, the job hasn't changed, just the methods of accomplishing it have. Bulldozers and backhoes have taken over where men and shovels once fought the elements. But it's still a lot of work every spring to put a mountain road back in order after a harsh North Country winter. Mount Washington and the Auto Road is as much a destination today as it ever was. There seems to be an almost mystical allure that draws people to its towering heights. For some, it's an opportunity to reach the top of a major mountain and then quietly contemplate the beauty and majesty of their surroundings. For others, it's a place to make history, to set a record or to break a record. This has been the case since Darby Field set out to climb in 1642. Each generation brings a steady stream of challengers. The areas of endeavor are as diverse and unique as the individuals who undertake them. Listen to this sampling of just a few of the records and record breakers through time.
That's not me.
1857. A man counts his steps walking to the top. 16,925. 1861. The road opens and Colonel Joseph Thompson drives the first horse-drawn vehicle up Mount Washington. 1875. Harlan Aumond runs down the road in 54 minutes. 1887. An all-time record for horse-drawn vehicles is set by Charles O'Hara with a time of 1 hour, 9 minutes. 1899. Freeland O. Stanley drives the first automobile up the road in 2 hours and 10 minutes. 1904. Harry Harkness sets a record in the first Climb to the Clouds auto race of 24 minutes, 37.6 seconds. 1907. The first recorded round trip is made on skis. 1923. The automobile hill climb record stands at 17 minutes. 1924. A Harley-Davidson motorcycle ascends in 15 minutes. 1926. Arthur Walden drives the first dog team to the summit. 1932. Florence Clark becomes the first and only woman to drive a dog team solo to the summit. 1934. The still current world record wind of 231 miles an hour is recorded on the summit. 1938. An automobile record of 12 minutes 17 seconds is set by Lem Ladd in a Ford V8 Special. 1950s. Alden Weigel of Walpole runs up the road, rides down the Cog, and hikes up Tuckerman Ravine all in 14 hours. Weigel then goes on to climb the road barefoot and blindfolded, then backwards, then pushing a wheelbarrow carrying a 100-pound sack of sugar in it. 1975, an alternative energy regatta finds an odd assortment of vehicles powered by wood, steam, garbage, and chicken manure winding their way up Mount Washington. 1998, Climb to the Clouds car race record stands at 6 minutes 42 seconds by Frank Sprongel driving an Audi Quattro. 2003, a Segway from Heritage, New Hampshire is ridden to the summit.
Oh, a Segway.
Now, less scientific-minded have been those who have used roller skates, llamas, skateboards, and unicycles as a method to reach the top. One New Hampshire man even claims to hold the record for the most diverse array of ascents, hiking up as Darby Field did in 1642, attire with Indian guards, riding up in the road's own 6-horse mountain wagon, in a 1917 Pierce Arrow, a 1938 Ford Woody, a modern-day auto road van, a motorcycle, a race car, snowmobile, snowcat, snow coach, Jeep, and a convertible. It seems every year someone shows up asking permission to use the road to be the first or the fastest at something on Mount Washington. Besides the climb to the clouds, special events include the Mount Washington Road Race. It's a classic foot race that annually draws a field of 1,000 runners, the best of whom can run the grueling 7.6-mile course in under an hour. You've now joined with explorers, adventurers, competitors, climbers, families, and travelers from throughout time and around the world who have found themselves drawn to the top of this mountain, to the place the Indians called Ajigachuk. The memories you will take with you are yours forever. This, above all, is the glory of Mount Washington, that it gives absolutely anyone at any age a chance to sit with friends and family, get some perspective on the world we live in from a place unlike any other, to breathe deeply the mountain air and reflect briefly on those who came before and will come after, perhaps members of your own family. Enjoy the rest of your day